This video is part of my series Introduction to Ethics. This video belongs in the category of Applied Ethics because I will now discuss specific ethical issues having to do with things like sexual relationships, marriage and gender. My name is Jouni Vilkka and this is my channel TFF Teacher from Finland. I hope you'll subscribe and click the thumbs up button. Sexual ethics is a weird subject because it is about issues many people get very emotional about, even though the subject does not directly affect them. Part of the reason for that is the pernicious influence of religion on the issues. Christian theologians did a lot to confuse the issue and make things problematic that weren't in antiquity. The harm done continues to this day, although progress has finally been made in recent times. It's funny how the concepts related to sexuality still confuse people. I will try to clarify things a bit. First of all, the word sex can be understood as a biological definition of an organism, of which there are more than one, having to do with the way it can reproduce. An organism can be defined typically as male or female, although nature is not as neatly and clearly defined as some people would like. The same word, sex, can unfortunately also be used to refer to the activity of sexual intercourse, which is clearly a different thing. The connection between these two meanings still confuses people so that many seem to find it difficult to think of one without the other, and so they conflate the concepts. When talking about humans, the biological definition is rarely useful, and most people have now adopted the term gender to refer to the social and psychological identity, such as woman or man. This social category, gender, is probably even more complicated than the biological one, sex, but has the advantage that people can define it themselves, and if you need to know how someone identifies themselves or which pronouns to use when referring to them, you only need to ask them. What some people still seem to struggle with is that neither sex nor gender have anything to do with sexual orientation. For even more people, it seems difficult to separate the concept of sexual orientation from that of sexual intercourse. They will probably understand the difference if explicitly pointed out, but the confusion is obvious in their implicit thinking. A person's sexual orientation only has to do with their sexual desires. Even asexuality is considered a type of sexual orientation, although only analogously to atheism, it just means the person has no sexual desires. But one's sexual orientation is completely separate from one's actual sexual activity. An asexual may have sexual intercourse, and a heterosexual might not. To summarize, sex is a biological, gender a social and psychological concept. Sexual orientation is a completely different concept, and sexual intercourse yet another. Keep these concepts distinct in your thinking. There is a common tendency toward binary or dualistic thinking, at least in the prevailing Western way of thinking. This can be seen in how some people tend to see things in starkly contrasting categories like black and white, good and evil, and indeed man and woman. Black and white thinking is actually considered a common logical fallacy, also called false dichotomy. I already covered it in my series Introduction to Philosophy and Critical Thinking. Just like numbers are not limited to 0 and 1 or 1 and 2, and just like there are more colors than black and white, there is also more variety to gender and even sex than merely two dichotomous categories of concepts would allow. Because sexual ethics and public discussions around these issues of gender and sex revolve so much around these concepts, I will explain what the fuss is about briefly here. It is true that sexual reproduction involves two types of cells, sperm and egg. It is also true that most humans have either XX or XY chromosomes. It is even true that most people who have XY chromosomes will be assigned male status and will develop a male gender identity as they grow up. No one is claiming otherwise. But all this is merely a description of the majority of cases. When people make this a political and perhaps a moral issue, they do not merely describe reality, they mean to prescribe it. And that is a problem, both ethically and epistemically. While the dichotomous assigning of sex works in most cases, there are also cases where it fails. The way sex is categorized biologically is actually a bit more complicated and involves more characteristics beyond chromosomes and reproductive cells, such as genitals, hormonal profiles, and external physical features like breast tissue and facial hair. Some individuals have XXY chromosomes, for example. This is known as intersex condition, among other terms. This term refers to a non-binary variation in characteristics. Intersex people can have a different external and/or internal genitalia, for example. The gender identity of the person can be anything: man, woman, or something else. A person might grow up as a woman and then find out that they do not actually have the reproductive organs that are commonly associated with women. They might have XY chromosomes like Susannah Temko does, for example. See the link to her TED Talk in the description below. As she points out, intersex people may be subjected to medical, even surgical procedures, even as newborns, without there actually being a medical reason for it. It is just to make them appear more normal. That is, fit the social aesthetic norm. The medical procedures come with risks and costs that may affect the person treated for the rest of their life. Is this practice ethically justified? Just because we would like reality to fit our neat categories, it might not. The fact is, there are people whose biological characteristics do not fit the only two social categories that have been accepted in Western culture. Some other cultures have, for a long time, been more accepting of such variety. Because reality does not obey our wishes, it would be wise to adjust our views to fit reality, rather than rage against it. What is important to realize is that what matters in ordinary speech is not the biological sex of a person, but rather their gender. The two concepts are pretty commonly now recognized, but the fact that gender is primarily a social concept was not understood until pretty recently. Yet the biological characteristics of a person are overshadowed by the social status of the person. It influences social interactions, behavior, and clothing, and more. It is said to be an important part of a person's sense of self. That is, gender has a psychological aspect as well. As a personal note, my gender has never seemed important to me or my sense of self. I have no idea what it is supposed to feel like to be a man, for example. But that is probably because I have never experienced my gender in a problematic way, or felt that my assigned gender is not what it should be. Others have different experiences. Most people accept their gender based on what they were assigned at birth, experiencing no discrepancy between that and their personal inner experience. The term cisgender refers to such people. Cis can be added in front of a gender to signify that the person is a cisgender person. For example, I am a cis man, or cis male confusingly. Ridiculously, some people have claimed this is some kind of an insult, but it is just a way of clarifying things. The term is needed to distinguish one from a transgender person whose gender identity is different from what they were assigned at birth. The word trans can be added before their gender. For example, Sophie Labelle is a trans woman. You should probably check out her comics where she discusses many of these issues in a very approachable manner. A transgendered person may identify as a man or a woman, but also as non-binary, genderqueer, or something else. They may or may not transition medically, and some countries may require some form of transition or treatment to allow them to reassign their gender. A transgendered person usually picks a new name, and to use the old, so-called dead name can be insulting, so don't do it. It shouldn't be difficult to learn the new name, because the same has been done for a long time when an artist has used a stage name. There was even the artist formerly known as Prince. Usually when women have married in the West, they have adopted the family name of their spouse. People have also added titles like doctor to their names without anyone batting an eye. So the only reason you would want to intentionally use someone's dead name is to insult them. A person who already is probably worse off than you in many ways. Don't be like that. Also, it bears repeating that gender and sexual orientation are not in any necessary connection to each other. Just because a person who has been attracted to women legally changes their gender to a woman, it doesn't mean they will now be attracted to men. They perhaps were thought of as heterosexual, but now they probably are seen as homosexual. Only the term changed to reflect reality better, not the reality itself. I'm not saying that sexual orientation could not change as well, because it can probably change throughout a person's life, even for cisgender people. For most, though, it remains pretty stable as far as I know. But even gender does not have to be stable throughout one's life. As Simone de Beauvoir famously stated, one is not born, but becomes a woman. This is the point about the distinction between sex and gender. Judith Butler has later taken this a step further by emphasizing the performative nature of gender. According to this view, prominent in queer studies, we continuously construct our gender through our behavior. Essentialism is wrong again, as usual. There is no such thing as an essence of gender. It is thus possible to create different genders. Phenomenologists consider gender to be a continuum rather than a dichotomy, or a series of discrete genders. Different individuals can express genders in different combinations of expressions, like shades of grey. A growing number of countries now accept the marriage between people of the same gender, also confusingly called same-sex marriage. Still, there are people who oppose it, usually claiming religious reasons. At least in the West, this idea was adopted by Christianity when the Church made Thomas Aquinas' views official dogma. He claimed that the purpose of marriage is procreation. Sex outside of marriage was already condemned, so you had to be married and were allowed to only have sex with your spouse, and even then only for the purpose of procreation, and only if it wasn't a holy day, the woman wasn't menstruating, and so on. It was, as far as I know, acceptable to enjoy sex, as long as you didn't enjoy it too much. Even most religious people, Catholics included, disregard such teachings these days. As the justification for his view, Thomas appealed to nature as the guide to morality. If we want to follow the example of nature, why not look at the mating habits of the praying mantis or the cephalopod argonaut? we might deduce that human females, following the example of nature, ought to kill the males during copulation and then proceed to eat their corpse. Or that males should remove their penises and throw them at the females. Clearly these suggestions would be absurd. Trying to argue for morality on the basis of nature has been criticized as committing the naturalistic fallacy. Just because something is natural, you cannot assume it is also good. Hume's guillotine has also been mentioned. You cannot deduce how things ought to be by observing how they happen to be. To make matters worse, Thomas was not aware of things like homosexuality existing among other animals besides humans, which it does. He also thought that without procreation there would be no further generations and mankind would cease to exist, and so it makes sense to allow sex to preserve the species. But this is based on the assumption that mankind should be preserved. It is not obvious that this is the case. One argument still used against same-gender marriage is that children allegedly have the right to both a father and a mother. This rhetoric tries to hide that what is actually meant is that homosexual couples should not be allowed to have children or even to get married. This contradicts the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 7, according to which all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law, and even more obviously Article 16, according to which all humans, without any limitation, have the right to marry and to found a family. They are entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution. So, from the contractarian point of view, it seems clear that same-gender marriage should be accepted, at least by all nations that have ratified the Declaration of Human Rights. Some have claimed that children would be somehow harmed by being raised by homosexual couples. The claim is hypocritical because everyone knows that a lot of children are harmed by their heterosexual parents, or because they are orphans or abandoned. There is no reason to think that just because of their sexuality, some people would be worse parents. Even if they are not perfect parents, no one is. Surely having any parents, one or more, is better than having none. Yet children are currently being forced to be born to, say, teenage mothers who do not want to have children or are unable to care for them. From a utilitarian point of view, it seems obvious that it is better for children to be raised by loving parents than some other alternatives. I suspect that the reason behind opposition to gay marriage is the inability of the opposers to distinguish between sexual orientation and sexual act. Whenever they think of homosexuals, they think of gay sex. Many people really are that bad at thinking. From a Kantian perspective, one could criticize the idea of marriage as only existing for the purpose of procreation. The categorical imperative urges us to treat others as ends in themselves, intrinsic value, not as only means to something else, instrumental value. Thinking of one's future spouse as only a potential parent for a child is to see them as having only instrumental value. It is no better than seeing them as sex objects. In fact, those seem like exactly the same thing. In the past, marriage served mostly two purposes. One, making children to continue the family line, which usually also involved them taking care of their aging parents in a world without pensions and the like. And two, making alliances between the couple, in the case of working class people, or between the families, in the case of noble and royal or just rich families. These days, marriage might be a significant alliance between people who it enables to form an economic alliance, pooling their resources, but more commonly, at least in the so-called developed countries, it is more about something else, such as commitment, communication, trust, shared values, flexibility and adaptability, emotional support, intimacy, fostering love, companionship, and emotional support, and even legal and financial benefits. Many people, myself included, want to get married with no intention of ever having children, and I am certainly not forming a military alliance between my own and my future wife's family. Even though, or perhaps because, the meaning and definition of marriage may seem obvious, it is important that such things are discussed at length before the wedding. Otherwise, the couple may realize too late that they have conflicting expectations. Marriage, or some other form of relationship, does not necessarily have to be romantic, and it doesn't have to be sexual. It can be either or both. There are a lot of different ways of life, and no reason to think that the most common types or the social norms you feel pushed onto you have to be the only ways. You are free to create your own kind of life that suits you, as long as you do so ethically. You are also free to have the kind of wedding you want, or none at all, should you get married. You don't have to follow social norms in such matters. Some people never want to get married at all. Some prefer common law marriage, essentially living as a couple without the status of marriage. In most Western countries, marriage is understood in a monogamous sense as a legal contract between two people. This often results in serial monogamy, where the same person is in a relationship, even marriage, with only one person at a time, but several consecutively. Serially monogamous marriage implies divorce. It has become rather common, but some may still object to it. Some do so for religious reasons, which I'll ignore here, but some claim ethical reasons if the couple has children. It can be thought that the children might suffer from their parents' divorce. But what is the alternative? Parents with growing grudges and dislike for each other? Possibly a hate-filled marriage involving mental and physical violence? Even if the child is not targeted, or the marriage is not quite that horrible, but just unhappy, living in such a family is not likely to be especially good for the child. They may even come to realize that they are the reason their parents are living such miserable lives. Some prefer to have several intimate relationships at the same time. This is called polyamory. It has been argued that the legal system that disallows polygamy, being married to more than one person at a time, is discriminating against people who wish to have their polyamorous relationships legally recognized. Some prefer different kinds of relationships with more than just two people involved. For example, relationship anarchy, as I understand it, is the refusal to accept social norms about sexual relationships. It means wanting to avoid labeling the relationship and refusing to accept rules in the relationship. To me, that sounds a lot like not wanting to consider the feelings, needs and wishes of the other person. I find it strange that anyone would want such a non-relationship with someone else, but people are allowed to make their own mistakes, I guess. The attitudes towards sex have varied greatly in history and by culture. In some cultures, a person, especially a woman, touching or being touched by a member of a different gender, even if only to hold hands, is frowned upon, or worse. In contrast, the current mainstream view in the Western world is far more tolerant, being informed by liberalism. According to this view, individuals should be allowed to do as they please, as long as the participants give informed consent. Honesty is required, so no tricking someone into doing something they don't want. They, of course, also must not be forced. It is also not acceptable to take advantage of someone's weakness of any kind. And if a person is promised something in return for a service, the contract must be kept afterwards. Children are unable, even legally, not to mention ethically, to give consent, so none of this applies to them. Sexual contact with children is thus always wrong. I find it necessary to remind you again in this context that sexual orientation or preference is not the same as a sexual act. In recent times, unfortunately, allegations and accusations of pedophilia have been thrown around carelessly. First, the term is often applied incorrectly, as it is a psychological term defined as an ongoing sexual attraction to prepubertal children. Second, the term is used incorrectly as it does not refer to the act, but only the preference. The proper word for the act in question is rape. Children cannot give consent after all, as I just explained. Conceptual accuracy is important especially, but not only, in philosophy. The stigma about pedophilia itself is harmful because it may make it difficult for non-offending pedophiles who don't want to harm anyone to find treatment. It would make sense for society to do what it can to get these people treated, both for their sake and the sake of their potential victims. But many people, especially in social media, get far too emotional about the issue to even be able to think about it coherently. Some also seem to be protesting a bit too much, if you catch my meaning. For sex to not be rape, informed consent is required. If a person is not able to communicate, they are clearly not able to consent. While even the requirement of consent, amazingly, has been resisted by some, I don't think it is quite enough. I don't understand why anyone would even want to have sex with someone who merely consents to it. Enthusiastic consent sounds much better. It means they don't just allow it, they actively, strongly want it. Not only is there no need to worry about legal or ethical problems, but it might even be enjoyable. Besides the issue of consent regarding the act itself, there are some other ethical considerations relating to sex. For one, there may be risks involved. Sexually transmitted diseases, for example. But even worse, the chance of pregnancy. There are obvious ways to reduce these risks, but if there is any risk remaining, I think informed consent requires that such issues are discussed beforehand. What if a pregnancy occurs? What will be done and who will do it? How big are the risks of getting an STI from the contact? Since issues like these are perhaps a bit awkward to discuss on a first date, I am advocating a careful attitude towards sex, even if I don't necessarily see anything ethically wrong in casual sex. Any intimate or sexual relationship requires a lot of communication, honest discussion about the relationship, its meaning to the participants, and so on. For example, does some activity count as cheating? It is not possible for a person to prevent their spouse, say, from acting in hurtful ways, for example by cheating, but one can require honesty and explain how certain behaviors would make one feel. It seems obvious to me that if a person does not care about the feelings of their partner, it would make no sense for that partner to remain in a relationship with a person like that. It is my understanding that polyamorous people tend to discuss issues like these far more and more openly than others. In fact, they may be literally more ethical than the majority because they think about and discuss these ethical matters so much. This is all I wanted to say about sexual ethics, at least for now. This is supposed to be only a brief introduction after all. Many topics in philosophy, especially applied ethics, tend to get emotional responses, especially from non-philosophers. My recommendation, should you feel emotionally affected, is to take a break and try to clear your mind before trying to communicate your thoughts anywhere. I will add links to related videos and other resources online in case you want more information. That's all from me this time. I hope to see you soon. Bye! If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.